Which one?
So this is Andrew Williams Jr. and another conversation with Andrew Williams Jr. and today with Mr. Carlton Brown of the Carlton Brown Foundation. And you're in Cincinnati, in Ohio?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
With the chairman.
And I'm here in Concord, Massachusetts, at the home of the Robbins House. And today's Juneteenth celebration weekend begins in Concord with Stuart Sinclair Weeks, the founder of the Center for American Studies at Concord, and special guest, Mr. Calvin Pearson from Project 1619.org. You're reaching out.
How you doing, sir? It's good to see you.
Greetings again. Yes. So this is a little known part of our history that nearly a century before Rosa Parks took her stand. And about 2 hours ago, I was speaking with a sister who grew up on Dr. King's knee, a soul sister who grew up on Dr. King's knee, and his father gave his life for the cause in Montgomery, Alabama. We're talking about Rosa Parks, who she knew. We are here in Concord with another sister whose name was Ellen Garrison, who nearly a century before Rosa Parks took a stand in a bus station in Baltimore, train station in Baltimore that focused the same issue. And she actually took it to court. And so I mentioned earlier to our guest, Calvin Pearson, this is not a well-known part of history. I wanted to invite him, if he wished, to say how it struck him, what he's heard today and what his impression is. So Calvin is with us.
And just as a disclaimer, I think we might have access to the inside of the Robbins House now. So what Mr. Pearson shares with you now is his first impressions. But here you are, Mr. Calvin Pearson.
Well, thank you, Calvin Pearson. I arrived here today from Virginia, really Hampton, Virginia, to really learn more about the history of Concord. But I'm finding out that Concord history is also intertwined with Virginia's history, two of the first colonies to be established. So we've got a lot of similarities, but I come from a land where there was Harriet Tubman. So we've got a lot of history in Virginia. When we start talking about the Underground Railroad, we've got a lot of history that predates Ellen. But again, this is an unknown story that they're trying to get out there. Rosa Parks internationally was one of the people who started the story about giving up her seat in public transportation. And now we're finding out that Ellen Garrison did it. So this is a story that needed to be told. And I think that's why we're here. And we're going to talk about that during Juneteenth, talk about the history of the Robbins House, a very historic place here in Concord, Connecticut. Concord has so much African-American history that people don't even know about. And that's why it's important that we encourage people to come to Concord and learn some of their hidden history. And this is what it's all about. We need to tell the story of Concord. We need to tell the story of Ellen. We need to tell the story of the Revolutionary War battle. There's just so much history here. We need to make sure that people around the world know this history. And that's why I'm here this weekend.
So if you could be so kind as to let us know too, the connection between Virginia and Massachusetts for the Underground Railroad, if you are aware of that.
Well, if you start looking at the Underground Railroad, it went really all over the South.
Yeah.
The thing that's so different about Hampton, Virginia, is that we had Fort Monroe, and Harriet Tubman, one of her Underground Railroad connections was to Fort Monroe. She, in the latter part of her career, we know she was a spy, but people don't know that she was also a nurse. When she came to Fort Monroe near the end of the Civil War, she was a head nurse at Fort Monroe in the Hospital for United States Colored Troops. So there's a lot of stories that we're still telling people about Harriet Tubman. She just wasn't an underground connector, railroad connector. she had a lot of important things that she was doing to make our country what it is today.
Yes. I'm very, very inspired and would like to learn more about that history so that I can disseminate that history not only to the people in America, but the people in the diaspora and Africa as well.
Well, congratulations, because Stuart Sinclair Weeks and I have put together a full 4-day weekend. And hopefully, Carlton, you'll be joining us. But the great news is that our intent is to provide you with the itinerary over these next several days. Anytime that you're able to join us by Zoom, we appreciate it. But we need you to also invite others to participate as well. As you know, you and I will be speaking on June 19th together, as you said, with people from around the world. But one of those people, her name is Juliet Mayabo from South Africa, brought to our attention that in South Africa, today is the Day of the African Child, June 16th. So they've done their best to include our Juneteenth celebration here in the United States with what they're doing in South Africa to show that today, this weekend, we have like a bookend. So we have the bookend of unfortunate uprising in South Africa by youth, by students who put their lives on the line to get freedom in their country. And we're ending it on June 19th with the day that the most slaves in the United States were freed. But there's another part of that story, Carlton, because even though it was in Galveston, Texas, on June 19th of 1865, when the general announced that slavery had ended and effectively ended slavery in Texas, there were still other states where slaves were still enslaved until December 6th of 1865, when the state I was born in, Georgia, became the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment. So there's a lot of history to unpack. And I do want to thank Stuart Sinclair Weeks. Stuart, can you tell us a little bit about the Sunday event addressing the history? Oh, tell us a little bit about that to get people a little knowledge about what's coming up, please.
Well, we have a series of conversations, Concordian conversations and conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. These next days. Sunday evening, we're going to be gathering in Monument Square, which is the center of Concord, which is a center not for all, but for many of our nation. Two of Dr. King's mentors and teachers who he spoke about were Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, both of Concord. So we're going to be gathering at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday evening in Concord Center to inaugurate the Concord Fellowship, which is based on the Concord Covenant, which was found in the papers of Concord's co-founder and great-great-uncle of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Peter Bulkeley. And the purpose of this gathering to inaugurate the Concord Fellowship with the Concord Covenant that was inscribed by Bulkeley and the first settlers of Concord, not so much Puritans who were puritanical, but pilgrims, is to bring us together. We live in a time where divided we are conquered, where all sorts of agendas, partisan and otherwise, are trying to separate us, as opposed to discover that in the richness and the variety that we find our fulfillment. So the purpose of the Concord Covenant and the Concord Fellowship is to bring together representatives of all the faith groups. The traditional ones are Jewish synagogue, the Baha'i faith, the Quaker or Friends, to speak about our faith and to discover what it is that unites us. And in this respect, if I may suggest, friends, given Concord's history, that what we do here in Concord, which has fired a number of shots heard around the world, not just the one on the 19th of April, that if we can come together, as Emerson said, we rise to meet the better angels of one another's nature, then I think that can, as it has, inspire many other communities. So if we, with all of our different faiths, very different, Jewish, Christian, Baha'i, you name it, Buddhist, etc., if we can come together around our shared humanity, then we hope that can inspire other communities to do the same. For there are, I believe, Concordians around the world. And I'll end just by saying what the word Concord means. When this town was established, it wasn't a water town or a Greenland. That is, it wasn't named after nature. And it wasn't a new Ipswich or a new London or New Bedford. It was named Concord. And Concord has four meanings. Concord, C-O-N-C-O-R-D, means covenant. Concord with an E or concord means peace or harmony. Con-cord means with the heart, concord. And a native daughter of Concord told me that Concord also means follow nature. So when I say that they're Concordians near and far, which they are, not just the millions that have read Thoreau's Walden or Louisa May Alcott's Little Women or Emerson's essays. So not just those who have a direct connection, but who are working in the spirit of a covenant out of the forces of their heart towards peace and harmony, following nature. So that's what we will inaugurate on Sunday evening. And we have many gatherings leading up to that, including we'll be in a few minutes down by the old North Bridge, where the shot was fired, heard round the world. And we'll be talking about what was meant by these words. In the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths self-evident that all men are created equal. What about the women? What about those of other colors? What about our humanity? So on the 4th of July, we'll be handing out a draft of our Declaration of Independence that'll have an addendum that addresses these questions, but we'll start that conversation in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I give it back to Andrew Williams, Jr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Carlton, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your being with us, because when a tree falls in a forest and no one's there, no one hears it, no one knows it. But when two or more gathered, then we can actually reach the world. Before we leave, I do want to walk you through just this histograph right behind us. Beginning in 1641, Massachusetts was the first American colony to legalize slavery. In 1725, a Concord tax roll lists 6 slaves, the earliest record of slavery in Concord. From 1740 to 1769, the peak period of New England slavery, most slaving voyages originated in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. In 1773, John Jack's epitaph is written by a British loyalist, noting the hypocrisy of those who clamor for freedom from England, but deny it to others. 1776, Caesar Robbins, enslaved from birth in nearby Chelmsford, serves in the American Revolution. In 1783, all men are born free and equal, so they say. Massachusetts courts adopt a new state constitution. Without laws to enforce this, however, slavery persists through the end of the century. 1810 through 1812, Jack Garrison, after fleeing slavery in New Jersey, moves to Concord as a free man and marries Susan Robbins, Caesar's daughter. They later live in the Robbins house. In 1823, Peter Robbins, Caesar's son, buys his house and 13 acres for $260. Peter and his wife live in the West Side His sister and her family live in the East. Ellen Garrison is born here. 1831, William Floyd Garrison launches the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in Boston. 1837, Susan Robbins Garrison, Caesar's daughter, is a charter member of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society. 1838 through 1861, Robbins House residents signed petitions supporting anti-slavery efforts, desegregation, and Cherokee land rights. 1841, John Garrison, Susan, and Jack's son, is listed as an eligible voter. 1841, Frederick Douglass speaks at the Middlesex County Anti-Slavery Society meeting, and next in 1844 for the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society. 1849, Henry David Thoreau writes Civil Disobedience as an act of protest against slavery after spending a night in the Concord jail. 1852, Peter Hutchinson, a relative, purchases the Robbins house and lives there with his extended family. 1859, Harriet Tubman speaks in Boston and Concord and several times, raising money for the Underground Railroad. 1866, Ellen Garrison, Susan, and Jack's daughter attempts to enforce the first Civil Rights Act in court after a railroad agent forcibly ejects her from a Baltimore train station. 1868, Peter Hutchinson leaves the Robbins house. A wealthy landowner moves it to Bedford Street and sells it to Irish immigrants. 1965, Massachusetts passes the Racial Imbalance Act, ordering school districts to desegregate or risk losing state educational funding. And in 2011, the Robbins house is restored and relocated to the site where you see it now. So Carlton, again, that's just a brief overview of the timeline of the activities here in Concord, Massachusetts, where we are, in fact, opening up the doors for cultural travel, trade, and tourism to make a difference, to actually be the place we want to be. We want to open the doors here for people around the world, particularly those in the African diaspora and from the continent of Africa who don't know this history, to come to this place and help spread the word about it. In exchange, we'll connect the dots on a global scale and let other people know that Concord is the center of the center of the center. And through here, we can connect all of the 50 locations that are identified on what's known as the Middle Passage Project. We're only a few miles away from Boston Harbor. That's one of over 50 locations around the world that have been designated as places that signify our transatlantic slave history. And when you speak earlier about the United Nations Forum for People of African Descent, it's also important to know, Carlton, that the work we do between now and next year will be in the last year of the 2015 through 2024 International Decade for People of African Descent. So it's now that we put our foot down and use the rest of this decade that's been allocated to us, I think, to align our efforts with those of the African Union who have a 50-year plan. This is also the end of the first 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 from 2013 to 2023. But it's up to us to shape how that next decade will look like. We all know that the value of the African Continental Free Trade Area has already been proven. But now we also need for us to pay attention to something that's not as well known as those 12 flagship projects of the African Union. We need to also think about the 5 legacy projects for those people in the African diaspora. So it looks like we're about to get loud here. I'm going to do my best to wrap this up, and then we'll follow up at another location. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Love you all. Have a fantastic day.
You too, and tag me. Tag
As
me
a
in the
matter of
next
fact,
video.
all right, thank you so much, sir.